tonight we are going to be speaking about what makes exceptional craft. This is the last and our final talk, I should say, in a series hosted with Artomatic, a DC artist-ran happening. And this was part of a series that we were doing. We were doing one talk every week for the last 3 weeks. And so if you're not familiar with the James Renwick Alliance, we are a nonprofit membership-based organization here in Washington, D.C., dedicated to furthering American craft and supporting craft artists. We are going to be hearing from 6 different people, and I want to give everyone kind of a quick, brief background on everyone so that we can all orient ourselves and what we should expect to hear this evening. So, just to do quick introductions, we have blacksmith Chris Shea, who designs and creates furniture and architectural metalwork from his studio in Southern Maryland. His work is included in the permanent collection of the Renwick Gallery and in numerous private collections. Chris, can you just say hello quickly?
Hello, here I am.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Chris S.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you. So Rebecca Ravenel has been a studio artist for 30 years, working primarily in ceramics. Rebecca is an associate member of the Torpedo Factory Art Center and teaches classes to adults and children around the Washington, D.C. area. Rebecca, can you say hello so people can?
Howdy.
Thank you.
I have a great one of her pieces.
Well, now I don't need Tim Tate to show himself. Tim is a co-founder of the Washington Glass School. His work is in the permanent collection, a number of institutions, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum. In 2018, Tim was one of the James Renwick Alliance Distinguished Artists, and just last year, he participated in Glass Stress, an exhibition during the Venice Biennial. So I'm going to move on to our collectors as well. We have Jerry Giver and J.G. Harrington, specialize in contemporary glass and paperweights. Jerry manages a nonprofit organization that offers seminars in historic preservation called the National Preservation Institute. She's on the board of the Maryland, D.C., Virginia Paperweight Collectors Association and of Friends of Historic Huntley, a support group for a historic house in Fairfax, Virginia. JG is a lawyer specializing in communications law at Cooley LLP. He serves as on the board of Wheaton Arts in Millview, New Jersey, and is the president-elect of the James Renwick Alliance. Together, they also co-chair one of our one-day craft show called JRA Day. So some of you hopefully have heard of that. If you have not, please visit our website. It's every December. Jeff Bernstein and Judy Chernoff are avid craft collectors and advocates of the field. For almost 2 decades, they've opened their home to share their extensive collection of wood art with many interested parties. As for what they collect, quote, "We major in wood, minor in baskets, and have other works in ceramics, glass, and fiber." Over 10 years, both have served as president of Collectors of Wood Art. And during the day, Jeff is a gastroenterologist and Judy is a physician and docent at the Renwick Gallery. So with all of that, I would like to lastly introduce our wonderful moderator, Chris Rivkin. Chris is an extensive collector of craft encompassing all mediums. She currently serves on the board of the South Shore Art Center and the Fuller Craft Museum and is founding chair of Craft Boston, a juried biennial exhibition of well-known and emerging artists in the United States. She's a collector by nature, but also a maker working in printmaking, painting, and stained glass. Chris, thank you so much for being here and offering to moderate our wonderful panel this evening. I would like to invite you to say hello and begin our panel.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you all. All right, I'm going to just jump right in, and I want to establish a baseline. So in just a very few words, what defines exceptional craft for you right now? Anybody?
We'll start. We'll give a listing of 3 things. I'm Jeff Bernstein. One is that I think it should have a mastery of the media. So whatever media you're working with, you're expressing all the beautiful qualities of the media that you're working with very well. Secondly, I think there should be outstanding craftsmanship, and that goes without saying. And the third category is something that's more intangible and hard to define. But I think when you're looking at a piece, you want to see that's exceptional, the dynamic energy that reflects the passion of the maker. And if you have all three of those, you probably have an exceptional piece of craft art.
Thanks, Jeff. Anybody next?
I guess I would say that for me, what something that catches my eye feels like it's the product of a particular vision. I like feeling a connection with the person, I presume, that made it. And if that object really feels like it came to being through a person's particular vision, that means a lot to me, as opposed to being a bit more sort of generic, I guess. And certainly a sense of a real connection with the material or techniques that it's made of or by. But material and technique are important, but they don't matter at all if the actual form itself isn't really compelling. Technique in itself is not enough to make an exceptional object for me.
Thanks, Chris. Tim?
So I agree, of course, with Judy and Jeff. I love to see well-made objects. So does Chris. We have a total love of it. I can't look at a piece of Chris's without actually noticing every beautiful detail, and that's what we love. However, for me, the first thing I'm looking for is something conceptual. I'm looking for something that tells me a story. If I don't have a story out of it, if it's a big chunk of blue colored glass and it's made by teams of people in Czechoslovakia, it's 5 feet high, I have the same response that I did when I was 8 with a bottle of milk of magnesia glass, looking up at it. What? It's nice. I like it. But honestly, for me, if I can't, in the same way that Chris feels there has to be a resonance of the artist, I have to feel like there's a story being told. I have to feel like that it's a deeply personal piece for me, as opposed to, I mean, there's beautiful goblets, for instance, technique-wise, spectacular. No interest unless that is telling me a story that I want to hear or feel compelled to understand.
Thanks, Jeff. Tim. And Rebecca?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess Tim says that because that is the kind of work that he makes too. That's what he's drawn to. So I'm going to put in the word from somebody who's made functional work all my life. And if obviously not all craft is functional, but if that's what it's aiming to do, be exceptional, it really has to work perfectly, has to be balanced, and every component has to be harmonious and functional. But having said that, I mean, I also agree that one that layers and sometimes a message is part of an exceptional work too.
Thank you. Tim, Jeff, JG.
Yeah, I think not so much a narrative, but emotional connection. That you see it and it resonates with you in some way.
Emotional what?
Connection.
Thanks.
So, we have a lot of abstract work, and narrative is not obvious in that work. Tim is smiling and nodding.
I love your collection.
The narrative is not obvious in that work, but a lot of them, it's what you feel when you see it, and the artist's ability to make you have that feeling, which is this combination of conceptual concept of the work and the execution. And the execution may not be beautiful, in fact, but it has to be thoughtful, it has to be intentional.
Thank you.
That makes a difference.
Yeah.
I'd like to say, while I sound like all hoity-toity by saying I only want conceptual, that's in my own work, like Rebecca pointed out. I am also a ceramic bowl addict, little known fact. So I collect so many that now I have to sneak them in past my husband because otherwise they go in the trash. So I understand the love of a beautiful, well-made bowl. Trust me. I'm with you 100%. I have one of Rebecca's just as an example.
Okay, thank you. All right. Makers, you each work in different mediums. In a few words, what draws you to choose those particular materials, and how does the process of manipulating those materials satisfy something inside you?
Wow. Well, I work in clay primarily, and I mean, maybe it's kind of that goes back to that early sensation of, you know, playing in the mud or whatever. It's just so satisfying in that it's so malleable. And there are so many different ways that you can work with it, and then the product. That motorcycle, Tim. So, and then the final product is kind of, you know, indelible. It's magically, you know, fired and made from this goopy stuff into this very permanent piece. So that's kind of the part of the magic of it for me.
For me, I work mainly in metal, forged iron and bronze. I've also worked in silver. And in truth, I tried other mediums until I found metal. I started later in life, about age 30, and I started in ceramics. I was attracted to furniture, so I also did some wood furniture. And I, at one point, realized that I was making ceramic vessels and glazing them with metallic glazes, and I was making wood furniture and painting it with metallic paints, and realized that I was maybe trying to tell myself something, and then went about learning how to work in metal. And what I love about it is the way that, especially with forging, it's a very physical process. I love getting my hands on metal, though I can't when it's hot, frankly, but after I can. And also, I love the textures that it takes. It shows the work that you put into it. The hammer, the fire, can really leave textures, which you can take out, but I don't. I love the structural qualities of metal. And as a person who's always loved looking closely at things like insects, there's a natural affinity to me between metal and creatures that have exoskeletons. And I think they've come up alongside each other in terms of insects being armored and segmented, and the techniques have come up alongside. And I always still find that fascinating.
For glass, I would say that it was the only thing it was any good at. It was horrible at everything else. So it sort of allowed me in. I also, when I was 8, my parents took me to the Corning Museum of Glass. And I still have a picture of me at that very day where I was determined at that point to start working in glass when I retired, was what I was thinking. And then, as many of you know, I got a terminal diagnosis 35 years ago. And at that point, I realized I had to start living the life I was going to wait for. I had to start then. And glass is what I wanted to go back to, what I always wanted to do. And have been very unbelievably fortunate since I started it. So.
Thanks. Okay, collectors, you are drawn to different mediums also. What is it about them that pulls you in? And if more than one medium, why?
Okay, I'll take this one. We collect primarily wood, as you know, and wood is a living material that changes over time. It is constantly either moving or changing color. So you have to know wood really well in order to work with it, because it's not going to stay the same forever. Each piece is completely unique. It tells the story of what the tree has been through. There's a visual richness to wood. There's grain, there's figure, there's pattern, sometimes there's chatoyance, there's spalting and burls. The natural elements are just endless in wood. And it's a warm medium. It begs to be touched. It begs to be held. There's nothing nicer than holding a very smooth piece of wood and feeling how soft the sanding has made it. You have anything to add?
Only that artists hate the fact that when you go to craft shows, people come into their booths and it's the wood artists where they're all picking up the pieces and tapping on them, as opposed to you wouldn't do that to a piece of glass, and metal's often too heavy to lift.
And getting their fingerprints on them. Yeah. Jerry, GJ, JG, sorry.
I answered everything. Glass is just so changeable. I mean, you look at what people do with glass, and it's all different. And it has these qualities of feeling like it flows and then it doesn't. And you can see all sorts of ideas and how they play out. I mean, glass goes from stained glass to vessels to these narrative forms that people do. Not that we have a lot of them, sorry, Tim. But it's the variety, and it's sort of endlessly fascinating what people can do with it. So
I have to add that we mostly collect things that are blue. So I think if somebody came to our house and looked at our collection, they would be amazed at how many different kind of textures and ways that artists can do things in blue.
You do know that the Imagine Museum almost exclusively carries blue glass, right?
No.
There you go.
No,
Yes,
it doesn't.
almost exclusively blue glass. Yes, I can tell you all about it at some point. But I would say 80% of what they have. In fact, they're doing a Zoom with Habitat on Saturday. Go take a look at Imagine. You'll see a sea of blue.
That's the second. That's a different iteration of installation then, because the first installation was not.
The first was collections. You're right. It was very different.
Yeah. Okay. You, as collectors, have indicated you tend to have a quick, visceral reaction to a new piece under consideration. So I'd like to ask you all, what is that reaction initially based on at first look? Execution, concept, color, material? What sucks you in the beginning? You all in your write-up said that you have an instinctive reaction. So what is it based on?
For me, it's form. It's always form that stops my eye first. Then, I mean, anything that invites you in, then you realize, you look at the structure of it, the details, but or content or narrative, as in Tim's case. But I don't think any high concept piece. First, it has to give you a reason to stop and look at it.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm.
See, I'm the exact opposite. I have to see the concept first, and then I'll look, is this well made? So for me, the form is secondary to what the story is they're trying to tell me. So when Chris and I go, we would never shop for the same thing. We would always look at different work.
Mm-hmm.
That's what makes a collection. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think the fact that when something's visually arresting, I mean, and certainly if you're going through a big show and there's just, hundreds of pieces, somebody who's a practiced maker or practiced collector can kind of cut through all that visual clutter and know, I mean, when something is visually arresting, you can zone in on it. And that could be form, it could be the color, it could be the harmony of the pieces, whatever, but it just whatever that catches your eye and makes you catch your breath.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking about things we've gotten when they were a first view, as opposed to like the things we've hunted over the years. It's really, it has to have something that catches your eye, and that something can be really beautiful. It can be startling in some way. There are lots of different ways it happens, but the visually arresting, as Rebecca said, that's the thing. It catches your eye and draws your eye in and makes you look at it.
Yeah, the showstopper.
For us, it's
for you.
We often, it's the form and the grain of the wood. If the grain is exhibiting, it catches our eye. And we sort of look at things a little bit differently than Tim, in that the concept is important, or for us, it's more the inspiration of the artist is important, but that's not what's going to draw you into the booth. It's what it looks like. And to use not to be a gastroenterologist, but I use my gut feeling. It's a gut feeling that all of a sudden you see a piece that evokes that dynamic energy that you want to look at it closer. Once you see the piece, then you might look at the title. There might be a blurb if it's an exhibition, and it might give you a better insight. And to me, learning the insight just adds more energy to the piece and more of a connection to the piece. But the concept, you can't see a concept generally at first hand.
I used to say that certain pieces are imbued with magic. certain pieces for no other reason. They're standing in a booth of beautiful things, but something in that booth says something magical to you. There's not many pieces that have that magic. So as a maker, I was trying to do that same thing, to do that same magic that you look for, Jeff, or that Chris looks for, or that I look for in my weird concepts as I create these hopefully awing pieces. So that sense of magic, we all know it when we see it, and it's so hard to actually define.
And it's different for everyone.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, that's
Right. And it doesn't have to be the showstopper. Like you mentioned the word showstopper.
No,
It
no,
doesn't have to be the
to you
piece that is
personally.
screaming, look at me, look at me.
No.
It could be a quieter piece, but you just, it
To
has
you
it.
personally, the showstopper to you personally.
Yeah.
What
Right.
what sucks you in? Yeah.
Now,
Good.
one experience I had when I was first starting out and going to museums and looking at collections and looking at silver objects in cases, I would wait, there'd be shelves and shelves of tureens and teapots, etc. And one piece would stop me, just catch my eye. I would just walk and let it catch me. And I had the experience over the course of about a year and a half of going to different museums and having a piece stop me that was by Christopher Dresser, a Victorian designer of silver. And they were so unusual. For me, something would stop me, and then I'd look and say, oh, Christopher Dresser. It must have happened a half dozen times that it was his. And they were all different, but I think this goes back to what I was talking about with a vision. For him, there are unusual proportions. Always brilliant execution, but a certain strangeness of proportion that made me go, wait, what? And then when you got closer, that invitation to look closer was rewarded too, which is always essential.
But you found yourself drawn to the same artist again and again without knowing that that was his work.
Yes, no, I didn't. It was just, I would just walk and say, I'm not going to look until something catches my eye. And he just kept doing it.
That definitely. Is it important for each of you to know how the object is made, the process? And if so, what does the difficulty of execution play? Or is the concept more important in deciding if this is extraordinary? Is it what role does execution play as opposed to concept?
I'll start one for a change. For me, most people can't figure out how the hell I'm doing what I'm doing. So in a sense, I hope that they are pulled in because of some sense of awe or something that as they create this inner world, they don't know how it's done, but they're still pulled into it. So for me, it's not going to be how beautifully, that's not totally true. I can't say I have any absolute. I look at one of Chris's pieces and they're so perfectly, beautifully built that I'm totally drawn into that work. So I guess it depends on what it is. If it's, if I'm thinking of it for my collection, that just lowers the value of what I'm buying considerably. But if I'm just looking at the actual artwork, I tend to look at concepts. And if I'm looking at just beautiful craftsmanship, I look to someone like Chris to see that kind of, I have a love for all of it.
Thank you.
From my perspective, I'm always curious how things are made, but it doesn't affect my idea about whether it's something that I care about. How well it's made, as I said, how you execute what you're trying to do matters a lot, how well you've executed what you're trying to do. But, I'm looking across from here at a piece right now, and while I know it's a piece of blown glass, outside of that, I'm not really sure I have the slightest idea how the artist made it, because I've never met him and never talked to him about it, and that's okay. I'd love to know that. I would love to talk to him and say, how did you do that? But I don't need to know.
In fact, in the fine art world at the art fairs, what it's made of and how it's made is almost superfluous to what that piece is. It's a very different world once you leave the craft. Plastic is better than glass.
Tim,
So
your voice is fading, Tim.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, I'll move up a little bit. No one's ever told me my voice is too low before. So when you're at the fine art fairs, you're at Basel, you're at Scope, or any of those fairs, any of the international fairs, it doesn't matter what it's made of. It doesn't matter how it's made or how difficult. None of those seem to matter at those fairs. It's almost exclusively concept driven at the fine art level. this is why we have these parallel courses that very rarely intersperse with one another.
Yeah, and I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum to folk craft. You know, there could be somebody sitting in a 12-year-old sitting in a Mexican market with tin snips and a pair of pliers, making something that will blow your mind because it's so clever and so charming and just well thought out. So, you know, craftsmanship, obviously, you know, we like to see well-made things, but there are things that can have that, give you that emotional charge and power that are that don't have to be excellently made.
You know, in the wood world, it's not important for me to know how a piece was made in order to decide whether we're going to buy it or not. But once we are attracted to a piece, it's always interesting to know how it's made. And when we have people touring our home and in our collection, they always want to know how they did it. And it's fascinating. Just because you know how, you might have an idea how to do it, doesn't mean you can do it. But the segmented pieces that have multiple different woods that are glued together and then turned or made are interesting. There's ways when you turn a piece of wood on a lathe, most people think of it round and curved. But what about someone who makes on a lathe a 5-sided vessel? And that's like, how did he do that? Or some of these creative artists who bend wood or use extra media in wood. So I think it enhances the enjoyment as the collector to know how it's made, but it's not necessary to decide whether you want to buy it or not.
Anybody else? Okay, see, I'm a process person. That's why that question is in there, because I need to know how something is made. Okay, is the conceptual message of an artwork an integral part of exceptional craft? Is there such a thing in functional art? That's aimed at Rebecca and Chris primarily. Because you're making functional pieces, how does the conceptual part play into it?
I think for me,
Go ahead, Chris.
one thing that draws me to making functional work and takes me off about it constantly is that you're starting out hedged in to some degree by requirements. If you're making a railing, it has to be a certain height and mount a certain way. If you're making a chair, it has to have a certain relationship to the human body. Anything else is there? It's those strictures I actually appreciate about the functional work and find my imagination works well within those guidelines better than just being presented with a blank canvas, I think. But I mean, I think concept is a pretty abstract word. I mean, I think there has to be a sense that this was something that was, again, envisioned and created to suit that vision. But whether it, for me, as far as communicating some idea that can be expressed in language, that is not something that motivates me in the least. I've never been drawn to make something that will signify something else. I hope it might bring associations with other things, might invite contemplation of natural objects, of the way that it's constructed, of any number of things. But as far as communicating something, again, that could be expressed in words, no, I never wanted to make something that means something. I always want to make things that are something. They just are something.
Yeah, and I would agree with that because I'm always, you know, thinking that my pieces don't have to say anything more than come drink your coffee out of me. But and your question can be taken a couple of different ways because when you say concept, I'm wondering if that's leaning more towards what Tim is saying, that he likes pieces that have kind of a cultural or a political message possibly, whereas a concept for somebody who's making a piece could also just be more internal to their medium, like working with the traditional techniques or consciously going against those traditional techniques. So it could be a concept that's very important, but it's not really visible to somebody, and it's not screaming a message.
Yeah, I'm looking more for the conceptual as opposed to the functional. Let me hear from the others what they think, and then I'll go back to Chris and Rebecca again, because they both work on commission. I think you do too, Tim, also.
Yeah, I mean, I'm drawn to Roberto Lugo, for instance, right? There's a ceramic person, works in functional, but has a heavy high concept. So I tend to be drawn to that. However, my closet is full of 500 beautifully made bowls that I eat cereal out of. So it doesn't matter in a way. I don't think any of us are completely one-sided. I think that all of us totally admire a beautifully made piece and can totally drive in themselves into something that's beautifully conceptual.
Any of the collectors want to chime in?
In the world, I don't look at in our collection as being a lot of pieces that are conceptual in nature. I look at them more as what is the inspiration, and the inspiration often has to do with the natural world. They don't really, there are some artists that do try to make pieces that tell a story or that reflect on the political situation or something else, but that's probably more of a minority. But it's the inspiration that I think is what most of them do. But I will tell you that also we have a lot of wood artist friends who will make a piece and we'll ask them what's the inspiration and say, well, what do you feel from it? And they don't really want to tell what their inspiration is. They want you to see what your reaction is, and it may be completely different from what they intended.
I mean, thinking about not glass, but ceramics, since we're talking a lot about ceramics, you know, there are a lot of ceramic artists who make functional work that you feel like there's, you know, conceptual stuff behind it. Warren McKenzie did this beautiful functional work that everybody loved and actually made a point of selling things at reasonable prices so people could buy them. And a lot of that had to do with his ideas about what ceramics, fine ceramics should be. Or a living artist, Donnie Caston, who used to be in the DC area, you know, she plays around with porcelain and what you can do with porcelain. And you know, her porcelain pieces don't look like other porcelain pieces because she has ideas about porcelain that are different than other people. And those are both conceptual approaches.
True.
And Isapov, and I mean, there's a ton of people in play. Perry, what's Perry's last name in Britain?
Grayson Perry?
Grayson Perry, for God's sakes. I mean, his are nothing but unbelievably textured ceramic pieces. So.
Okay, so let me go back to a question again about Rebecca and Chris. You make functional objects, sometimes on commission for a particular client. How does that change how you view the making and eventual use? And Tim, this goes to you also, because I know that you have done some with videos, et cetera. So how does that change your thinking in the making of the piece? Because now you're, as you said earlier, Chris, you have parameters that you have to go by, as opposed to, you know, the height of the railing, 36 inches by building code, et cetera. So when you're doing a commission like that, how does that influence you and affect your ideas? Because you have to fit within those.
Yes, and for me, so I'm usually working on commission almost exclusively, and making something specific for somebody's house. Often it's, you know, a very specific function. It's a table, it's a railing, it's a gate, and so before, I mean, in the making of it, once we've decided what it's going to be, I really appreciate knowing where it's going to go and how it's going to be used, and that is motivating for me to know that people, because I'm a very hands-oriented person, to know that people will be getting their hands on this. They will be using it and hopefully stopping and saying, oh, look, it'll cause you to stop and appreciate it. But that is another level of restrictions we put on ourselves. It's got to meet certain functional requirements. It's got to fit into a certain space. It's got to fit into a certain budget range. It's got to, and for me, if it's functional, it's truly functional. And it's not just a statue of a railing or a chair. It's one that will be used. And so it's motivating. It's frustrating as heck sometimes because it is so limiting. And I think for me, well, one reason that I tend to not stay away from trying to, or tend to stay away from trying to put my own content in terms of narrative or more articulated concepts is because by the time I've met so many of those requirements, there's only so much room left for the vision and creating something extraordinary. And that's where the fun is within those confines. I'm often drawn to, I remember what Robert Frost said about writing free verse instead of metered poetry. He said, I'd rather play tennis without a net. And for me, every commission, every house, every client's tastes. I mean, for me, there's not, I can't be the complete artiste and say, here is the chair I've made for you, you will live with it. I have to present the idea in the first place because someone's presenting me taking a risk to commission an object that no one's ever seen before. I haven't seen it either often until I've made it. So I've got to communicate it from a drawing to them. So it's an interaction.
You did indicate that you work best against those parameters, but you work better when you have those guidelines.
I feel like I do. I curse the whole time because I would love to just, but a line would, I might be working something in the shop and thinking, oh, but if the line went over here, that would be terrific, but I can't. So then it's forcing yourself into those parameters, and there's still infinite room for expression, for, again, creating something extraordinary. You just have to find it. And as I say, I resent it all the time, but I know it's what I do better than just starting with a blank canvas.
Right. Rebecca and Tim? Tim, you're muted. Tim, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm saying I remember Chris's railings for Giselle Huberman, where you had very little constraints outside of the height of the railing because you went batshit crazy and making this unbelievable piece, which, by the way, I just saw last week in the house is abandoned. So you can go and take them.
Is it abandoned? Oh, that's terrible. I should go take them.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah. But well, that was a case that I think a number of people in this discussion have seen this. It was railings for an enormous house with 3-story tall great columns in front that were really overblown. And the railing sort of had poked some fun at that. And the people who commissioned it were completely okay with poking fun at it. But that's another constraint to show up at this house. And I was excited. Ben and Giselle Huberman want to commission railings from me. And my first view of the house was these enormous, pretentious, 3-story tall great columns. And I thought, oh, well, you can't ignore them. So, that was the constraint. I mean, functionally, it just had to, it was a few stairs, had to start at one place, stop at the other, and be sturdy enough to hold people up. But I'll say one of my most pleasant memories, again, dealing with function, is seeing Paul Parkman, someone who many people here know, at a time, this beautiful man who has had an impact on the craft world. There's time he needed to get up those stairs without falling down. And it made me feel good to know that aside from all the other things, I was able to do that. Sure. So I think, he invented the rubella vaccine. I helped him from falling down. I think, even.
So I think that Chris and Tim have a much wider range of work that they do. So when somebody comes to them for a commission, it's more wide open. For me, I generally stick to smaller pieces, tableware. So people have seen what I make and they're just asking for a smaller variation, some variation on that. So I'm usually pretty comfortable, collaborating with them on that. There's not much pushback, except if somebody comes to me and asks me, to do something that's kind of outside of that, I'll hand it off to someone else.
I'm working on one right now, two of them, one for Leslie Lane, and we just finished one for Giselle Huberman too. People know what I do. Even though I do a series of things, I kind of used Chihuly's guideline years ago to have different series that I like to work in over time, so I don't get stuck doing the same bowl 1,000 times. And so when they come to me, they usually know what I've done in that area. And they don't say, oh, make me an endless mirror when they want a video piece. They're going to basically start within the framework of this is what the kind of thing that Tim makes. They're not going to suddenly change it into something different. It's a partnership with the person who wants to do a commission. And I really take those partnerships very seriously. We'll talk about every element, color, the size. We'll go through every single bit, but it's still got to fall within my kind of purview, and which it almost always does. So it's just like Rebecca, it's just different.
So Tim, the content that you're putting into pieces on commission, is that part of, how much is that a part of the discussion, the story you're telling, the ideas you want to express?
Almost always part of it, because something's like I just did a wall that's all nature things. Mike, you heard Mike and I talking about it. So what happened is the people who saw another one had said, "Oh, we like these images of nature that were part of that." So we're then taking hold of that. Oh my God, a whole flock of deer running past. So we took those concepts and just built out on our, showing them the ones we want to do. So it wasn't a concept that we didn't want to do. If they came to us and said we want rootless architecture, we wouldn't have said, "Oh yeah, oh boy, I can't wait." So it was within what we already do.
Tim.
Sorry, I'll mute me.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears now, and I want everyone to think of a piece of exceptional craft anywhere you've ever seen it. What would that be? What would be a good example of you've seen it, and what makes it exceptional in your view? You can unmute now, Tim.
I'll go for a little start for everybody. My favorite piece of glass in the world isn't the Ai Weiwei cube, 1-ton cube of glass or any of that. It's a tiny 6-inch sculpture that Sabella Peretti and Stephen Paul Day did called the Pink Twins. And for some reason, this little tiny thing had all the magic I ever thought of in a piece of glass. So it wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the most expensive. They barely remember making it, but that piece just had everything I ever wanted in a piece of glass.
Next.
I'll go next.
Can you hold that question, Jennifer?
One of my favorite pieces to introduce visitors to at the Renwick Gallery is Wendell Castle's Ghost Clock.
Oh, yes.
And for those of you who've never seen it, it is, let me just say that at first glance, you think that it's a sculpture that's headed for storage. And I would say more than 50% of visitors to the Renwick will walk right by that and think, that's on the way out. We don't need to even look at it. And I will always pull them back and say, now look at this and tell me what it is you see. And I get them to start talking, and they talk about this cloth that's covering the sculpture that they can't see, and why is it out here in this room anyway? And when I tell them, what it is, and the surprise about it, and that it's one block of wood, laminated wood that is carved and bleached and painted, the double take is always fascinating to me. I love seeing that look of wonderment and bewilderment on faces of visitors. And, here the technique, master carver, important. But not only is the technique important, then you talk about what it means. He made 12 functional grandfather clocks before he made this one, number 13, which is covered in a sheet and is the suggestion of a clock. And then we start talking about what this shrouded item means and how you could interpret that. What I love is at the end, many, many people will say, I just want to touch it. And I always say, bingo. That is what craft is. It begs to be touched. And maybe that's my wood, the way I look at wood, and maybe that's my viewpoint, but that piece is such an amazing piece. Even now today, after having seen it and talked about it thousands of times with people, I just love how it really brings people who are not even familiar with art into this world.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Sure. Another Renwick piece. In fact, you go to the Renwick Gallery Permanent Collection, see dozens of the best pieces. Great things you just want to see again and again. But Beth Lipman, banquet table, which as it happens, Jerry and I saw her making part of it without knowing we had when she was at Wheaton Arts as a fellow. But it's this enormous 8 foot, 10 foot long, longer maybe, 18 feet long.
I think it's 18.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. 18 feet long, table covered in glass. It's the remains of a banquet. And it's, you know, first of all about the still life tradition. And it's endlessly fascinating. You can look at it and see 1,000 things. And then there's the most amazing telling detail, which there's glass on the floor that's broken.
It's all clear glass.
All clear glass, right? It's all clear. Everything is clear, and it's, you know, clear napkins and clear glasses and clear pieces of meat and clear watermelon and all sorts of things. But the thing that she did by having the broken piece sort of makes it feel like it's real in some way that you wouldn't. And of course, there's a great story about it. Basically, everywhere it's ever been shown, there's been some point where a museum guard has gone up to a curator and said, I don't know what happened. I was watching the whole time, but part of it's broken and on the floor. But it's such a beautiful, incredibly executed piece. And it's not the individual pieces are perfect. She in fact says they don't need to be.
A lot of students made parts.
But that it's a whole. The whole thing comes together, and it is just phenomenal. It's one of the, in my mind, it's one of the 2 or 3 best pieces in the gallery. It's just, when it's out, you have to see it.
Nick Bell said he'd never show it again.
It does take up a lot of space.
Yeah, he said it was a pain in the ass. He would never put that thing out again.
Rubbermaid containers is where she stored it in her basement. 25 huge Rubbermaid containers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now, I can point to one that really changed things for me completely, which was before I was even on this path, before Christopher Dresser, when I was still working at the Shakespeare Theater and thinking of myself as a literary sort of guy who was interested in maybe 2D art, paintings, beginning to be. And I went to a show at the Corcoran. This was like 1993, and it was a show of contemporary African art. This was a time when I didn't look at objects in cases. I pretty much looked at paintings on walls, and object in cases I didn't at all. And I came upon this ceramic vessel on a pedestal in a case by Magdalena Dundo. She's a British African sculptor. And I just stopped in my tracks and said, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I stood there for about 15 minutes just staring at it. It's just a very simple, it's a large hand-built coiled pot. It's both sort of botanical, organic, and like a human figure. And while I was standing there, actually, this also made a difference, was that while I was standing there staring at it, a woman walked up and did the exact same thing. She just blurted out, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. And I actually have a picture of it on my desktop, which I could share. Can I share a screen?
If you can do it quickly.
I think I can. Let me.
Well,
Nope.
I want to go on to the last question.
Her name is Magdalena Dundo, and they do have works of hers in the Museum of African Art too.
I met her at Michael Sherrill's a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Phenomenal, potent, very, very. I was talking about a potent form, and she makes very, very potent forms in ceramics.
I want to introduce myself. I'm Jennifer.
Oh, can I just go? I have one more question, Jennifer, please. Yeah. Okay, everybody, this is the last question. Do you have what you would consider an exceptional craft object in your home? Throwing it out to you. And what criteria makes it exceptional?
I have a Martin Janicki, and the criteria was he was willing to trade with me. So.
Does that count?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I have a piece I just got by Bennett Bean. I waited 20 years and I finally got one. He's one of my favorites, but I also have a lot of Mexican folk art, which it just guts me every time I look at it. So Yeah, I've got a lot of pieces that I would consider exceptional.
We have a Judith Schechter. I never thought we would be able to get a Judith Schechter, buy a Judith Schechter, but we finally found one that has actually no people in it. And it's
Very unusual.
It's very unusual, but it's an amazing piece, and we're just feel so honored to even have a piece of hers. So that's pretty amazing.
I have pottery, a mug. My grandpa grew up in Stockholm, Sweden, and then moved to Minnesota and did a lot of pottery work when he was younger. So a mug from him is really meaningful to me. And I'm the new editor at Craft Quarterly. So I also wanted to say hello and introduce myself. And it's nice to see you all on Zoom and gather. Hello.
One piece we would like to share is from an artist by the name of Pat Kramer from Hawaii. And he is immersed in the land and the sea and the culture of Hawaii, and has a reverence for bowl making. And his style is very organic in nature. And he created a piece in a series out of Norfolk Island pine that was turned, carved, burned, and also ebonized. And what he tried to do with this series was try to develop a piece that was believable, but also had an altered sense of reality. And where you look at it, and it's almost using the techniques to use sort of, is it beauty or beast? And I say that in an interesting way because Judy and I both had a different reaction to the piece when we first saw it. And since we're home, I'll show it to you in a minute. But my first reaction was, this is a very unique and a different kind of bowl that's very created in a beautiful way. And Judy saw one aspect of the feet that was sort of menacing and said to me, I don't know if I could live with that in our home because of the reaction she had. But I'll show you the piece and quickly just give you an idea about the piece. This is the piece. It's called Night Blooming Sirius. It might be hard to see in the Zoom, but it's a piece of Norfolk Island pine. And you first say, well, it doesn't even look like wood. But if you know Norfolk Island pine, they have branches that come off of the same level. And if you look closely, you'll see the knots in the wood that when they interplay with the shape of the bowl, it forms this geometric design. He then did a lot of sculpting. It's not just a simple bowl form, but you can see the bowl form in general. But then he sculpted the rim of the bowl so it looks like waves. And he ebonized the wood by doing a process that he develops that makes it look like a leather patina. Then he sculpted the inside, and when you look closely at the inside and how he connected the knots of the wood, it almost looks like a creature at the bottom of the ocean. And then to add the part that Judy initially reacted to, if you look at the feet of the vessel, they look like talons. Again, is it a beautiful vessel, or is it a menacing creature? And if you just try not to speak I'm trying to speak quickly, but if you look at the whole piece, it looks interesting and unique from all different angles. And it expresses the mastery of the medium, outstanding craftsmanship, and it just speaks of an energy of the passion of the maker. So this is just one example.
Beautiful, Jeff. That's beautiful. Okay, do we want to go on to questions, Emily?
Yeah, so we have one question. Well, first I want to react to that bowl. You guys were saying that a piece makes you have a physical reaction to it, and that definitely made me have a physical reaction, one of fear. So I would say that definitely fits your criteria. So we have a question from Jamie Ann. She said, I have a number of questions, but we'll try to limit them. My first question is about the function versus conceptual conversation. I've been noticing museums collecting more conceptual than functional work, and I wonder if that shows a different perspective of exceptional, and if that definition affects the panelists' thoughts.
Panelists?
I think it depends on the museum. There are some museums that completely embrace functional, and others that will never have a functional piece there. I think it's the mission of each of the museums. I mean, we tend to focus on the Mint and the Renwick and people that embrace functionality. So But when you get away from that, I agree. There's very few once you get away from the craft museums.
Yeah. My experience and yes, I've seen that, to my dismay, that museums are definitely collecting more conceptual work than functional. And again, another of the things that I curse about, even though I'm drawn to function, is that I often think that in truth, a work that is truly functional is actually considered less valuable in a lot of people's eyes. They might not say it out loud, but it's somehow the fact that it makes itself useful makes it less valuable in people's eyes. And I mean, I often think a hypothetical object that has the same expressive sculptural qualities, one is functional, one is not. Talking dollars and cents here, I expect people would be willing to pay more money in general for the one that's not functional. And I don't, it's a frustration.
If you look at like Leno's work is outrageous. It's one of the highest priced pieces. So it's not across the board.
But is that really
so
functional?
There are exceptions.
The vessel that no one uses is not truly functional.
I put a flower in a Leno vase.
That doesn't count, Tim.
I mean,
his work is not functional. It's sculpture.
Whatever.
Museums often do, sort of general museums do sort of the deck arts, fine art distinction in their heads and in their collections too. You're not contemporary work, you're just really not going to see, say, Metropolitan Museum collect much that's functional unless it's like Japanese or Chinese, and they can think of it as from a place. They don't do it much with American work. And so, you know, that's hundreds of years of how museums think about things. They're sort of
even the curators are decorative arts or fine arts curators. They divide it up before the pieces even get there.
Absolutely, yep.
Someone put in the comments that said, to me, if it's not functional, it is art, not craft. So I think that goes along with what you all are saying.
Yeah.
And there's something to the distinction, I think. I've been talking about all of the frustrating limitations that function puts on. And if a museum is interested in just having an object that expresses the maker's complete vision or expresses an idea, then I was just explaining how often my ability to express ideas, again, that can be expressed in language, is so curtailed by dealing with function. So, I mean, they are, especially if it has to be truly functional. So, I mean, I get it. I get why people, what you want is just the purest expression of a person's vision, then chances are you won't be able to sit on it or put water in it.
So, Chris, why don't you make sculpture? Why don't you get away from functionality, the constriction, and go hog wild?
Because I'm still dreaming of making the chair that does all those things. The world's greatest doorknob.
Good answer. I like that.
Yeah.
And I can't explain it. There's something to do with my sort of, I don't know, my New England Yankee upbringing and being brought to historic houses and seeing objects that were used by people that they do carry meaning now over sometimes centuries. The meaning, of a functional object can accrue over time. And I like to be part of that history, part of that dialogue. So I'm drawn to that, and I don't make decisions based on, what would, be more, lucrative or, leading to greater glory.
I don't know, you do make the world's best knockers.
Thank you, I tried.
You did it.
Every piece I make, and I thought it with door knockers I made for floor. At some point, I do think, well, somewhere on Earth, somewhere there has to be the greatest door knocker known to man, right? Why shouldn't I be the one to make it?
You did it.
I think we've run out of time now.
Okay. Sorry.
But thank you. I want to thank the panel, Jerry Gibber and J.G. Harrington, and Judy Chernoff and Jeff Bernstein, Chris Shea, Rebecca Ravenel, and Tim Tate. Thank you very much. Thanks for everyone for joining us. I hope this is informative.
Yes,
thank you, Chris, for hosting this,
yes.
and also Jimmy. Yeah.
Chris, we want to thank you so much for being our fearless moderator this evening. I think we've, I had I actually was writing down all of my questions. So I have to kind of And I'm sure there were some other people who had the same experience. So thank you
Jennifer,
everyone.
to be Jennifer at a later time.
Yeah, we'll have to have a whole nother question and answer panel. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to Chris. I do want to remind everyone, if you're not a member of the James Renwick Alliance, to come, check us out. We have other events coming up. Though this was our last Artomatic one, we just did our first virtual trip this past Sunday. We have Coffee and Conversation, which has been wildly successful since the pandemic has started and it's moved online. So I do encourage you to, join us, learn more about us, and support us in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.